From the tree-lined north end of the Motor City, this is your Daily Detroit for Tuesday, September 15th, 2020. I'm Jer Stays. On today's show, we cover a few stories to know around town, plus a couple of conversations. With wildfires and air quality in the news, the American Lung Association has a new report that talks about the impact on the local air of switching to electric vehicles. You might not realize it because we're not as smoggy as some cities, but our air pollution situation in Metro Detroit just isn't good, and a big part of it is all the vehicles we drive. Ken Fletcher from the American Lung Association has more. Then, in these divisive times, how does one navigate political conversations at work? Should you even engage? Tricia Plovey from Robert Half joins me for some tips and localized statistics on how Metro Detroiters feel about the subject. All of that after a quick note to remember to become a member and support our coverage at patreon.com/dailydetroit. Membership matters, and it has been powering us through the pandemic with your generous support. We're on a drive to sign up 25 new members at any level. Help us get closer to the goal at patreon.com/dailydetroit. And thank you. Let's do the news, shall we? First, a quick update on the coronavirus numbers. With more than 570 confirmed cases reported Tuesday, Michigan's pandemic totals are now up to more than 113,100 cases statewide. That's along with 11 fatalities, 5 of which are from a records review, for a new total of 6,612. There are a couple areas of concern in the lower peninsula. Ingham County, home of Lansing and Michigan State University, as we talked about yesterday, but also Wayne County is now in the orange area by the Harvard Global Health Institute. I cross-referenced the city's numbers and the county numbers, and areas in Wayne outside of the city of Detroit seem to be seeing the increase. The City of Detroit's data portal actually shows a continued decrease in 7-day rolling case averages. Staying in the city of Detroit, multiple outlets are reporting that the city of Detroit's budget situation, while it isn't great, is manageable for now in the face of the pandemic. The projected revenue gap is going to be $62 million more than originally predicted, so it'll stand at $410 million. The city has been able to manage the finances so far with staff cuts and hour reductions and using their so-called rainy day fund for emergencies. In order to fund some improvements like police and fire equipment, the Joe Louis Greenway, and work on city parks and recreation centers, the city is looking to sell $80 million of general obligation bonds. This is on top of a proposal in front of voters called Proposal N. If approved, it would provide $175 million for blight reduction and building rehabilitation, and that would help replace federal money for those purposes that is, well, basically run out. Dan Gilbert's Bedrock Real Estate has gobbled up another distressed Detroit property. This time, it's the 37-acre Sakthi Industrial Campus off of West 4th Street. 10 of those acres are developable land, and that's key in the city where contiguous, connected properties are at a big premium. It's also by the future Gordie Howe Bridge to Canada and the Norfolk Southern Rail Line. As far as buildings, there is nearly 530,000 square feet of industrial space and 90,000 square feet of office space. In press materials, Bedrock believes there is a lot of demand for suitable industrial space and that their goal is to bring new manufacturing companies into the city. Currently, the lone tenant is automotive parts supplier Mobis. Sakthi Automotive, if you remember, was recently forced to liquidate after internal management and ownership strife that resulted in losing their biggest customer, General Motors. Home values are up in Macomb and Oakland counties, and they have the highest jump in the state of Michigan. Oakland leads the pack with values rocketing more than 34% in the last 5 years. Second is Macomb County, up more than 28%. This is all according to new data from Smart Asset. Michigan's average increase in home value is up more than 20% in the last half-decade. Wayne County underperformed the rest of the state at 18%. Statewide, they also carried the highest property tax rate increase over the last 5 years. Though, on average, all counties in the region had slightly higher property taxes. As Ben Folds would say, they're rocking the suburbs. Joining me on the line is Ken Fletcher. He's the Director of Advocacy for the American Lung Association. And there is a new report out that Detroit is listed as the top metro area to benefit from a transition to electric vehicles. Ken, welcome to Daily Detroit, sir.
Hey, it's glad to be here this morning.
So it's called The Road to Clean Air. Where did the idea for this report come from?
Well, we release every year our State of the Air report that looks at air quality all across the country. And we see that there's still large parts of the country that's living with unhealthy air, even though great improvements have been made since the Clean Air Act went into effect a long time ago, but we still have far to go. So we wanted to take a look at what can we do to take us to the next level to, continue the improvement in the air. And we know the transportation sector is a huge contributor of air pollution and has a lot of negative outcomes on our health. So we wanted to take a look at if we made that transition from gas combustion engines to electric vehicles, what impact would that have on our health and on our environment?
Well, and the time horizon that this talks about says 2050, which it may feel like a long time out there, and it is, but it also seems to be reasonable considering how long cars take to turn over, the switch, that kind of stuff. Because still, the vast majority of cars today are gasoline powered, right?
Yes, absolutely. And we wanted to be realistic on this. So, by having a 30-year transition period, by taking a look at, we, shot for that goal of 2050 to have it totally transition over to electric, that's doable. That's definitely doable as a country. We can reach those goals.
Right. Because I think a lot of the conversation around this includes goals that, although they may be laudable from different perspectives, the reality is things just don't move that fast.
No, they don't, unfortunately. But when you're talking about electric vehicles, more are coming on the market all the time. Both the cost and the range of these vehicles are improving all the time. And if we move forward with the policies to support those vehicles, such as, making sure that we have the charging stations available and as convenient as gas stations are, we can certainly help with that transition and make it so more people take a look at electric vehicles when they go to make that next purchase.
For sure. So let's talk about first the national benefits and then the local benefits. The health benefits, especially in dollars, are pretty staggering.
Oh, absolutely. We found that on a national level, if we make this transition by 2050, we would see $72 billion a year in public health benefits. And those benefits would be all across the board in terms of, decreased healthcare costs, but also decreased premature deaths caused by this pollution, far fewer asthma attacks, far fewer lost days at work due to people unable, whether they end up in hospitals because of, asthma attacks or unable to be out because of bad air quality and everything. So it is staggering when you look at that type of money, $72 billion a year in healthcare savings. That's dramatic. And then if you add in, if you're getting the power for the electric vehicles from renewable sources, which reduces, the pollution from coal burning power plants and things of that nature, and transition to solar and wind and things like that, the savings for avoided healthcare costs jumps up to $113 billion. So we're talking huge savings.
There's the direct health benefits too. You're talking about, like here in Detroit, more than 1,200 asthma attacks. You're talking about premature deaths. This has real impact on people's health outcomes.
It does. And, a lot of times when we have some of these conversations, it turns into the environment versus the cost of business to, clean things up. So that kind of becomes the terms of the debate. But what we're doing here is saying, hey, let's take a look and see how are these policies going to impact our health and our lives and improve our lives by making these transitions. And you're right. You said in the Metro Detroit area, if we make this transition, we're going to avoid approximately 100 premature deaths a year. And you're going to see, you mentioned the over 1,200 asthma attacks that will be prevented. We all know Detroit has some of the highest asthma rates in the country. And if we can do something to help impact that and help roll that back and help these folks who already have asthma, hopefully get it so more people don't develop asthma, then, this is huge. This is going to really improve people's lives. And, we're talking too about 5,600 lost work days per year that will be prevented in the Metro Detroit area if we make these changes. That's a lot of productivity.
Yeah, that definitely has impacts, not just to businesses, but also to personal families and incomes and things like that. And, here in Metro Detroit, this is a conversation that I've dived into a couple of times, but I think it's important for people to think about. although we don't necessarily have the visible smog problem as much as other regions, although today, I'll tell you, Detroit's pretty hazy, that we have some of those, and you talked about that, those higher asthma rates, other breathing problems and health issues. We have a lot of industry that puts a lot into the air, and some of the zip codes that are, frankly, the most dangerous in the state when it comes to lung health.
As I mentioned earlier, we put out our annual State of the Air report, and this year's report gave the Metro Detroit area an F. All three, Wayne, Oakland, Macomb counties, all had failing grades because they had too many bad air days for ozone pollution, which is the smog. So people in the metro region are already breathing air that is too unhealthy. And we're not going to move that up into, an A or even a B grade until we do something about the transportation sector. So that's why it's so important that we start taking these steps now. We start making that transition. There's only so far we can go by cleaning up the dirty coal power plants, by cleaning up our factories. We also have to address that transportation system because, when you have all those cars and buses and trucks on the road every day spewing pollutants into the air, it's going to have a huge impact. So if we can start dealing with that and addressing that, we can start seeing those grades move in the right direction for Metro Detroit. And really, I think that's the only way we're going to see those grades start moving.
Well, yeah, you talk about electric transportation. It's not really captured in this report, but I was curious because we have a lot of listeners who are interested in this. What kind of impact would, say, a shift where we added a significant, obviously not a majority, but a significant number of people, say, to using mass transit more often and things like that, especially as the pandemic starts to subside, which, eventually it will?
That definitely be beneficial, having people move to mass transit and not have as many cars on the road. But we also need to make sure that these buses and forms of mass transit are electric vehicles as well. Buses traveling around and idling and things of that nature also adds pollution to the environment. So if we can make the transition so even our buses and our, other delivery trucks and things of that nature are also electric vehicles, just think of all the smog that you'll see decreased, all the pollutants that will be decreased, and then these health benefits that we'll see as a result of it. So we do want to move people to public transit, but we also want to make sure that transit is running clean as well.
And to wrap up, I can't help but ask, because it's literally outside my window here in Detroit, what are your concerns about the effects of things like the wildfires out west? Because those smoke plumes seem to be going farther and farther. There's even pictures starting to share around of haze over Detroit. I'm looking out my studio window right now. It is far hazier than I've ever seen it in mid-September. What kind of impact do you think that might have? Is that something we need to even think about, even though that we are a fair distance away?
Oh, absolutely, because these wildfires are so many and so intense that smoke is drifting all across the country. So we're seeing a lot of areas being impacted by it. And hopefully, by this, it's high enough in the atmosphere where people aren't going to breathe it when it starts getting this far over. But it still is a huge concern because those wildfires are creating very unhealthy air with a large amount of particle pollution in it. So that's very bad for those who are already, compromised, those with asthma, COPD, the elderly, and other health problems. But even healthy people breathing that type of air quality is going to cause problems. So it's a huge concern.
Well, Ken Fletcher, American Lung Association, thank you so much for your time today on Daily Detroit. I feel like I really learned something.
Well, I'm glad that we could be here and join you today to talk about these important issues.
The reality is you can't spend more than a few minutes on social media or watching television or talking to folks without politics somehow entering the conversation or seeing a piece of political advertising or just something involved with this cacophony of noise that is happening right now. But how do we handle that? And how do we handle that at work? Joining me on the line is Tricia Plovey. She's the Detroit Senior Regional Vice President of Robert Half. They've got some new data out and also some tips. Tricia, welcome to Daily Detroit.
So what we found when we surveyed Detroit workers were 25% of Detroit workers said it's not appropriate to engage in political conversation at work. And then 16% said that it's okay to talk politics at work. But more than half of Detroit workers, so 59%, said it truly depends on the situation. And to your point, the whole political area right now is just, it gets so heated. There's, a lot of varying opinions out there. And so I thought that was interesting that, 25% of Detroit workers that were surveyed said, let's not engage in any political conversations at work.
I mean, it's got to be something that's difficult to navigate. I know that people are so passionate, especially this election cycle, people even more so. And I mean, and it sounds like, oh, this is the most important election. I'm not going to say that because, I've lived through a few elections now, but I do know that it feels like one of the most divisive elections that we've ever had. And so how can you kind of help navigate that and really to your benefit? Because it feels like if you say the wrong thing, it can really kind of hurt you at work, whether it's with coworkers or a manager or that kind of stuff.
It can. So a couple tips would be to tread lightly. And what I mean by that is if you choose to participate in political conversations, keep it on the lighter side and constructive. Don't make it confrontational. Don't try and sway somebody to your side if maybe they like an opposing candidate, for instance. Maybe you talk about the, debate that happened and keep that light, but try and not be opinionated to a degree that might offend somebody. You can also decline politely. So don't feel pressured to share your political views. You can simply say, you know what, I'm not comfortable with the conversation and I don't choose to weigh in on it. And the other person needs to respect that. And then also speak up. So if a colleague is engaging you, in a conversation that makes you uncomfortable, pull the person aside and let them know if you're not in the office together, give them a call and let them know, hey, that makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't choose to engage in that conversation. And if it actually escalates from there, definitely talk to your manager or even human resources if you feel that you need to. And then how you can avoid the whole thing is by just not talking about it at all. So don't bring up politics at all. You may not know the depth of how somebody feels about politics or about the political candidate maybe they're endorsing this year. They may surprise you.
Well, one of the things I think about too is managers. They've got a challenge of their own to handle with, they have the employees they kind of came into this situation, and it can be difficult to navigate those waters and even navigating the difference between, say, like what is an advocacy thing versus what is political. What can managers do to help ensure these discussions don't get out of hand and help people, not only stay productive, but also stay happy? Because that's part of it too, right? You want a good, cohesive working environment.
Well, I think the first step would be if your organization does have any, rules around politics in the workplace, make sure that as a manager, you're making sure that your staff knows exactly what that looks like, what is included in that. Is it okay to talk politics at work? Is it not? And always just try and err on the side of keep it light if you do choose to engage with somebody on politics. I think also if you have, regular managers meetings, maybe it would be a forum to bring something up, in a light way in that conversation about, what is acceptable in the workplace for that organization.
How important is clarity in this discussion around what the organization standards are?
I think clarity is really important so that everybody knows kind of where the boundaries are, and they won't run into problems if they know exactly where the boundaries are and that those boundaries aren't meant to be crossed when it comes to politics in the workplace.
How did Detroit stand compared to other cities? You talked about those numbers early on, about the 25% of Detroit workers saying it's not appropriate to engage in political work, all that stuff. Where does that stand nationally? Is that in line? Is that an outlier?
It was a little bit lighter than some other locations. So, for instance, San Francisco, they were the highest as far as, it's appropriate to discuss politics with colleagues. They were at 63%.
Wow.
So I thought that was pretty interesting. But when you think about San Francisco, it's a very politically active city where people often, voice their opinions. So that wasn't, completely surprising, I guess, from that regard. It might also be likely that talking politics with colleagues is more common in San Francisco and perhaps more widely accepted in the San Francisco organizations. But I did think that was pretty interesting.
That is interesting. And it just kind of makes me think news has been so nationalized. Information has been so nationalized. It's kind of why it's important to look at where you live and what are the norms for where you live as opposed to just the national conversation. I mean, as somebody who's been to the West Coast, things are different over there. And same thing even in a place like New York or even Chicago. Each place has different cultural norms. And it's easy to forget that with how sometimes social media and national media kind of makes the nation kind of think that everything's the same.
Yes, agreed. We just find ourselves in an interesting position this year with the election. And then it's not just the election. when you add, COVID on top of that, right? And then you also add remote learning for kids at home. And people are highly emotional right now with all of this going on. And sometimes it can all get lumped in together in a political way. And so it's best to try and just avoid those types of discussions if you can.
Well, and that's been a challenge, I know, for managers, and including in like the restaurant business, but also in corporate settings where things like COVID and the like, it really sets people off where we're having these, it almost morphs into politics. It moves from science or even just, okay, I have to comply with this regulation. It seems like everything ends up becoming political at one point or another right now.
It does seem that way. And like I said, I think we're just at a heightened emotional state right now with everything that's going on at once. And I think, something else important to note too, that, if you do happen to offend somebody, what do you do if you know that you've offended somebody from discussing politics in the workplace? It's important just to apologize immediately and be sincere about it. And just be careful how you phrase your opinions, even if you're talking to a close colleague, and that way, hopefully, you can avoid offending anybody.
Yeah, it is quite the challenge. Well, Tricia Plovy, thank you so much for spending some time with us and helping us navigate this and share this data. It was enlightening. I really did not know that the percentages were the way they were, and I think I learned something.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad that I was able to help you learn something on that.
And that is all for today's show. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you got something out of today. I did. Well, if you want to support what we're doing, become a member at patreon.com/dailydetroit. If you don't have money, send us a review on Apple Podcasts. Or just send a nice tweet or any of those things. It really doesn't matter. It's just great when you all support the show. A reminder that we have a voicemail line at 313-789-3211. That's 313-789-3211 for your feedback. With that, I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and I'll see you around Detroit.